Welcome to this video. I'm Sean Stevenson, a Senior Program Manager on the Exchange Online Transport team. Today I'm going to be going over some of our email security updates as we've been making some changes in the service and working hard to further secure your emails. On the agenda today, we're going to cover just the general overview of Exchange Online emails and TLS and how your messages are secured along various parts of the pipeline. We'll move on to the new standard that we've implemented, MTA-STS. We'll then talk about the exciting news and commitments we've made around DANE and DNSSEC. And then we'll talk about the client protocol, SMTP O-Auth, and how upcoming deprecations are affecting it. So as a transport team, we're very passionate when it comes to listening to you, listening to our customers, listening to our MVPs and the industry at large. And one of the ways that we do that is through user voice. And many features that we implement are taken from suggestions and the number of votes that we see on user voice. In the security space, we do try to be proactive with what we're working on. But we do have a large backlog, and we were always looking for input to see where we should focus and put our resources into developing and improving our service. And user voice is a great feature to hone those skills. So what is our team mission? So transport, we're the internet postman at Microsoft. We make sure that emails get delivered on time as best as possible. But there's so much more that we do. We're securing that mail flow, both within our service, between your clients and us, between us and other email servers on the internet. We're managing that flow of data, looking for improvements, mechanisms such as forwarding of emails. How can we improve that, secure that? Discovery, we understand moving from on-prem to the cloud comes with less visibility. And we're working on features to try and make that change a little easier for admins, as well as for business owners that don't want to spend too much time having to deal with the management of Exchange Online. And for this talk, and specifically, we're going to be focusing on the secure aspect. But if you are interested in how we're doing to manage your email operations and increase visibility and so on, you can take a look at the other video that we've provided, which is on Exchange Online Transport, New Email Management, Optics, and End User Experiences by my colleague Kevin. So let's move on to securing of email messages. So within the Exchange Online experience, there's two major pieces of how emails flow between someone's mailbox and someone else's inbox. And we can break it down into the connections and those messages flowing between clients and Exchange Online when a user submits that email, as well as when they're looking to retrieve that email from their mailbox. And then the second phase is messages that are traveling on the internet, going from our Exchange Online service to other mail servers. Those could be on-premise servers, those could be your business partners, or just another recipient on the internet that isn't hosted with Exchange Online. And when it comes to the client side of things, we have the ability to make TLS mandatory there. We're looking to protect the credentials that are passed between the clients and us. So that definitely helps out in terms of security. So we can ensure that that connection is encrypted. However, within that encrypted connection, there is the passing of credentials. And by default, legacy protocols such as SMTP O-Auth, as well as POP IMAP, they use basic authentication, just a username and password as the default mechanism for authenticating in our service. Now, we've seen that with the attacks that happen via whether it be spear phishing, emails, or harvesting credentials another way, those basic credentials are weak and open to abuse, and can very easily lead to a compromised account sending out either other spear phishing attacks within your service, within your company, or sending out spam on behalf of your brand, which has a reputation risk. We have been doing work when it comes to deprecating basic auth. We've also introduced for SMTP auth, as well as the other legacy protocols, O-Auth support. So that is now an option. We're looking to impact the industry and allow partners such as third-party clients to also start using this, so that we can reduce the use of basic auth to the point where it's no longer needed and can be turned off, which is something that we're actively working on. But I'll talk a bit more about that later. On the other side, when it comes to the mail flow between email servers, that's something that there isn't a lot of visibility, and it's something that we handle on behalf of our customers. We talk to the likes of Gmail, ISPs like Comcast in the US on ways to improve the security there, because by SMTP's nature, TLS is optional. We've added our own features within Exchange Online, such as Mailflow connectors, that allows you to create those logical links between the mailboxes in the cloud and, for instance, your remaining on-premise servers or business partners where you want to enforce additional secure behavior, such as forcing the use of TLS. These connections, based on how SMTP was designed, even with TLS there, do not protect against man-in-the-middle attacks, based on the fact that there's no expectation of the use of TLS. There's no expectation of the identity of the server that we're connecting to deliver a mail to a domain that you have addressed your email to. So let's talk about those emails and just dig into the fact that this is an area where we've had to work, and we've had to work, like I said, with our industry partners. Something that was definitely accelerated after the release of Edward Snowden's leaks and informing us of the types of passive collection that are happening on the internet. We needed to do something to mitigate those passive collection attacks, as well as then active attacks when it comes to man-in-the-middle. And part of that was coming up with new ways of securing those emails. And we'll talk a little bit about MTA-STS, which is a new standard that came out of those discussions. But when it comes to securing the TLS layer, something that we're pushing hard on is the deprecation of old versions. And at the moment, we're looking to deprecate TLS 1.0 as well as TLS 1.1. They're old. They don't stand up against extremely sophisticated attacks, although they haven't been broken yet to the point where we're worried and we need to turn it off tomorrow. But we're definitely pushing on our customers to move off of TLS 1.0. And we've already done so for our US government customers. And next up is our enterprise customers. And so we're definitely urging our customers and Exchange admins to take a look at their organizations to see where TLS 1.0 is being used and take action on that. At the moment, around 2% of mail flow to and from Exchange Online uses TLS 1.0, 1.1. That doesn't seem like a lot. It's a long tail, but it's a very large tail. That's 1.5 billion messages, and that's 40,000 customers accounting for those messages. The risk here is those features we provided, such as the Mailflow connectors where you can force TLS, they become a liability when we remove TLS 1.0, and that was the version of TLS being used over those connectors, because the instructions for forced TLS means that we will fail and we will not send those emails out, and there will be a disruption to our customers. So we urge our customers to take a look at the reports we have, and so doing, investigate what servers still need to be upgraded to supply the likes of mail to Exchange Online using TLS 1.2. Now, even though TLS 1.0 is disabled, that doesn't necessarily mean that the man-in-the-middle attacks go away. As I said, SMTP is very susceptible to those based on the lack of expectation of a server name, or the lack of expectation of any server for that domain actually using TLS, given that it's optional. But let's take a look at the report that we have that can help you with these investigations. We've worked hard to migrate to a new modern EAC, and you will see these reports showing up now in this new experience, and hopefully to provide you with the information needed to run down what servers are still using TLS 1.0 that your Exchange Online cloud mailboxes are still communicating with. So this is the modern EAC. As you can see, front and center, the inbound messages and outbound messages for this test tenant show that some of them are still using TLS 1.0. This would then allow you to jump into the report and take a look at exactly where these messages are going through. You can have a look in terms of the connectors being used, the breakdown of versions, and see the overall message flow as well, if you're looking for the volume of those messages. And you can very quickly then have a look and identify, well, it's a certain connector that's responsible for 100% of those 1.0 TLS messages. And that's where you're then able to make decisions around upgrading those servers and being able to mitigate future impact when we do finally deprecate TLS 1.0 from the service. Another thing to note, and we're speaking from new experience that we've gained from turning off TLS 1.0 in the US government cloud environments, where we have already completed those deprecations, is that the impact is not just on servers that are only supporting TLS 1.0. There are also servers that support TLS 1.2, but do not necessarily have the correct ciphers. Together with the change to remove TLS 1.0 from our service, we're also updating the ciphers that are used to negotiate. And so servers that communicate with us need to support one of these ciphers. This is something that might be overlooked, especially if you have checked servers and updated them to the latest versions of Windows and Exchange Server, and know for sure that they do support TLS 1.2. So that is another avenue to confirm the compatibility with Exchange Online once we do deprecate TLS 1.0. So I talked about Mailflow connectors and how we've added features specifically within Exchange Online to protect that Mailflow. Something that we developed with other industry partners was a common internet standard, MTA-STS, something that we can allow for a landscape of sending emails on the internet where we can set the expectation around TLS security. It allows us, without actually knowing and having an established relationship with another email server, to have an expectation of whether or not it supports TLS and what name should we expect when we resolve that MX record, which could be changed in a man-in-the-middle attack. So it was developed to solve the weaknesses in SMTP. It's something that we can do from our side on the outbound traffic, and I can announce that we are securing all outbound traffic with our MTA-STS implementation. So any recipient domain that Exchange Online sends to will have MTA-STS checks done. It's something that's up to domain owners to secure their domain with by hosting a policy. But if they have done so, then that connection to their own email server would then have the further checks of MTA-STS, checking, for instance, that to ensure that they are using TLS 1.2. The mere fact that they've protected their domain with MTA-STS means that they are using TLS 1.2, plus that the certificate that gets served from their server matches up with their MX record and ensures that there has been no tampering with that MX record. We're also sending out TLS reports. This is a sister standard to the MTA-STS standard, and it allows us to then inform the domain owners who have secured their domains on the activity that we've seen while sending to them. How many successes, how many failures, what those failures were, to inform them if they have a misconfiguration or maybe there's an active attack going on against their domain that we have prevented by failing those messages that would have otherwise been sent. This is something that allows for that feedback mechanism when we don't have an established relationship with that other domain owner or email server. For our customers, they need to act themselves to protect their domains. This is something that by design is separate from email infrastructure in terms of the policy that gets hosted to indicate that you support and have secured your domain with MTA-STS. That policy is meant to be on separate infrastructure. It's hosted as a text file and can be hosted in a company's website infrastructure. In that way, separating out and adding an extra level of security between email infrastructure and web hosting infrastructure. So let's have a look at what are the components of MTA-STS and TLS RPT reports. So the first thing is a DNS entry that a domain owner would have to set to indicate that they indeed support MTA-STS. That location would then be looked at by our servers, and we're currently looking at that location to identify which domains that we're sending to at the moment do support MTA-STS. Our implementation would then go and if we find that DNS record, would go via HTTPS, download the text file which contains the policy for that domain, and in so doing, we would then be able to establish an expectation of what is the MX record entry that we should expect, and from that we can then compare that to the certificate that's served when we do establish a connection with that email server. And finally, when we want to, at the end of the day, which is the turnaround time of 24 hours, where we aggregate the successes and failures to that domain, we would then send an email, in this case, as the DNS record indicates, to the address laid out for TLS RPT that includes the report for that domain. And then the owner of that domain can then process that as they see fit to identify any misconfigurations or, like I said, active attacks. So let's have a look at what that looks like for one of our domains. So here we have, very simply, the MTA-STS policy for Outlook.com. It indicates the version of MTA-STS. At the moment, we have it in testing mode, and then it has the pattern for the MX record and a time to live. Very simple, but with that information, that MX pattern, it allows us to immediately identify who we're expecting when we connect to the email server where we're going to send emails for Outlook.com. So for DANE and DNSSEC, this is something that's older than MTA-STS. This was the gold standard of protection for DNS that was developed in the mid-2000s to secure the DNS records of not just MX records, but for websites and any DNS related entries that are the backbone of the internet. Because of attacks that allow attackers to, for a limited amount of time, take over DNS records and inject themselves into the conversation, it means that DNS has always been the best place to further secure and definitely stop man-in-the-middle based attacks for email as well. Our MX records are susceptible, and it's very easy to then redirect mail to another email server. And so with those attacks, the basis of which is to have an MX record which we don't have any expectation over get changed to the attacker's server. With DANE specifically, there is now a mechanism through a TLSA record to add those additional protections against such attacks, and that record is then secured with DNSSEC, which adds certificate-based authentication within DNS records. It's something that's been slow to be adopted. There are pitfalls and complexities around implementation and maintenance, and DNS is not something that changes very rapidly compared to us, changing our email service, for instance. And so, with that in mind, it's been a slow process to develop planning and develop a design to implement and roll this out. But it is something that we have now publicly committed to supporting and implementing DNSSEC, and it is currently being worked on. The outbound protection will come first for emails leaving our service, followed by then inbound protection. Finally, we get back to the client and those communications with our service where emails are being submitted. Like I said, this is a connection that is mandatory to use TLS. So in that way, it is secured. However, we still see a great deal of those connections using TLS 1.0. And the risk there is that because it's mandatory to use TLS, all of those connections would stop working. Those clients would be unable to send emails when we turn off TLS as part of the TLS 1.0 as part of the TLS 1.0 deprecation. With this in mind, we've been pushing hard to get our customers to take a look at this. The problem being that a lot of these clients are the likes of scant email multifunction devices that are not things that are necessarily upgraded as easily as, for instance, Thunderbird client or Outlook. And so the difficulty there is just in visibility. So we've been working on reports to identify and see what mailboxes are in fact using TLS 1.0 still. We still see over 300 million customers and 1.5 million mailboxes being responsible for 500 million messages a month. And all of these are at risk when we turn off TLS 1.0 for the client protocols such as SMTP, O-Auth, POP, and IMAP are also in there. It's something to worry about. It's something to confirm and make sure that that all clients in a given organization have been upgraded. If there are clients that cannot be upgraded, 20-year-old printers, then an alternate solution needs to be found, such as, for instance, keeping Exchange server on-premise and having those devices connect to that server that you've configured to still support TLS 1.0. So if we have a look, we can take a look at the new modern EAC and just remind ourselves specifically about the SMTP Auth client report. This would then give Exchange admins a much easier view into exactly what is happening with mailboxes sending using SMTP Auth. You can see volume. There are some organizations that aren't even aware of this protocol, that it exists, that it's being used. And like I mentioned before, because of basic authentication that can be used for it, it means that attackers can compromise accounts and use SMTP Auth to send out emails. So this report is great for gaining visibility into that usage of the report, of the protocol. The report also then, as I said, shows users that are still sending emails out with TLS 1.0. And from there, you can then take action and find out which clients of theirs are at fault and need to be upgraded, and then mitigate the risk involved with the deprecation of TLS 1.0. Something you don't have to worry about. So I'm sure and hopefully you've heard about the basic auth deprecation that is happening in our service. It's a huge security pain point, as I said, with compromised credentials. However, given the nature of SMTP Auth, we've applied for and received an exemption against SMTP Auth being included in the basic auth deprecation. This means that your printers will continue to send out those emails, that we won't suddenly need smart printers that support O-Auth. However, it does mean that you need to be proactive around protecting yourself against attacks. We have settings where you can disable SMTP auth for mailboxes that are not using it. It's something that we're being proactive, and we've already disabled for new tenants. So they would then have to enable it for mailboxes on a case-by-case basis if that mailbox needs to use the protocol. And we can say that currently we have no plans to disable basic auth for SMTP auth. It's something that may change in the future, but given the long tail of devices, those 5-year-old printers, those 1-day-old printers, still only support basic auth with SMTP auth. So we will not be disabling it anytime soon. So you can rest assured there. And with that, we have a few links. There are a number of things that we're doing around deprecation, and there are dates and more information available when it comes to preparing for TLS 1.2. When it comes to securing SMTP auth, with disabling of accounts, we also have information on that, as well as reading material around the new standards for MTA-STS and the TLS RPT reports, as well as blog posts to keep you abreast of the planning that's being done for DNSSEC. So with that, I'll thank you, and hope to continue to help and inform our customers to better secure their environments, as we work to do the same in the background from our side. And that's all from the transport team. Thank you.